I'm on Twitter, like, too much. Follow me. And for a while now, I've been seeing tons of clips of people playing this weird game called Only Up, where the objective is to go, you guessed it, up. But the clips that I've seen haven't even been of people completing the game. Instead, the viral clips that I've seen are of people falling down, all the way back to the bottom. It's a heartbreaking experience, and the reactions are always so extreme and funny, but there's a reason for this. In this game, there is no saved progress, so when you fall, you have to pick up from where you land and do it all over again. This game, with its clunky movement, gives players the most extreme punishment for every single mistake. So messing up hurts so much more. But is this game actually difficult? All it did was arbitrarily choose to not include save points. But if you remove save points from any game, that would immediately spike its difficulty to the max. But if Only Up had saved progress, it would lose its entire appeal. Its appeal is the extremely high stakes, because without it, it's kind of a trash game with terrible AI voice acting, a racist elephant, and I'm pretty sure it's an NFT scam. Regardless, it got me thinking about difficulty in video games, and the importance of difficulty in the gaming experience. So, let's talk about it, shall we? Difficulty in games is definitely a subjective concept. While some might find a game like Elden Ring super duper duper hard, others can beat these games with a DDR dance pad. But where some people play games for the challenge, others just want to play the game on the easiest mode possible to get through it, either for the story or just because. Look, you don't need to justify how you play your games. You do you, it's your money. Growing up, almost every single player game had a difficulty option, where the easy mode felt fun with a little challenge. And usually, the hardest option was pretty freaking difficult. There was Proud Mode in Kingdom Hearts, where even the little shadows could kill you, Legendary difficulty in Halo 3, where every grunt had unlimited sticky grenades, Veteran difficulty in all of the Call of Duties, where one bullet meant death, which, actually makes sense. But these difficulties, I remember being awful. Yet for some reason, I still chose to do this. Some of these games like Halo incentivized you with in-game cosmetics, but plenty of games wouldn't give you anything special for beating the game on its hardest mode, except bragging rights at the playground. Some games only gave you the option of a hard mode after completing the game, like Mega Man, Bayonetta, or BioShock Infinite with its 1999 mode. This approach forced players to experience the game as the developers intended, before challenging themselves to a way harder experience. But see what I just said there? As the developers intended. Because while difficulty options do help with accessibility of a game, what you lose by adding difficulty options is the intent behind the game's specific choices. The biggest example of this are all of the fromsoftware games. These games are so synonymous with difficulty that any game perceived as more difficult than average gets the title the Dark Souls of their genre. This game is the Dark Souls of Metroidvanias. This game is the Dark Souls of shooters. This game is the Dark Souls of Dark Souls. We get it. It's hard. And while many of the FromSoftware games receive some backlash from critics and fans alike for lacking in accessibility features, they never gave into the pressure to have an easy mode, because that's not what their game is about. Also, these are the same critics that couldn't get through the beginning of Cuphead. So, these games punish you for mistakes, but want you to learn from them and try different approaches, different weapons, different abilities, or try just grinding to the point where you're over-leveled. Either way, they aren't hard for the sake of being hard, but hard so that players find their way to beat the game at their own pace. Everyone's individual experience with Elden Ring felt different because you could choose to just brute force your way through, or find cheesy strats, like magic, to succeed. These games don't hold your hand, and they don't want to. And while these Souls-like games can feel impossible to beat for some, for those who accept the challenge, the reward is a far greater experience because of the struggle in the journey. Trust me, beating your first Dark Souls boss makes you want to cry. Which brings us back to Only Up. I don't think this is the Dark Souls of platformers because it's not that hard, it's just annoying. Its difficulty is more in its extreme time commitment, not in its actual requirement of player skill. A better example of a similar game is Getting Over It. This game has the same premise, you're going up to the top of the world, but the difference is that the way you move is so utterly ridiculous and difficult to use that it already is inherently challenging. This game's movement is so much of a challenge that even if it had save points, people would still find it pretty hard, while Only Up is only hard because they force us to waste time if we fail. So we need more games that are like Dark Souls and less games like Only Up who exist so that we can just make fun of streamers for falling. The funniest thing is, the Dark Souls games weren't even the first game to be hard and not have a difficulty setting. A lot of the classic Super Nintendo games had one difficulty. All of the Mario games have been around forever, and you get what you get. If you're struggling, too bad. That's the only way to play it. Yet people didn't complain because 1. There weren't alternatives to this, and 2. These games struck the perfect balance of difficulty and enjoyment that left most players satisfied. However, we've been seeing a new influx of criticism against some games being too easy. Some of the criticisms are valid, while others were done in bad faith. But it does beg the question of what exactly makes a game feel challenging enough without becoming a Souls-like game. Take a game like Pokemon. More recently, they've come under fire for holding the player's hand through everything. Players found these games so easy that they've done hardcore Nuzlocke challenges where if your Pokemon faints, you treat it like it's dead and remove it from the game entirely. And while that added challenge has helped, the modern games have become so easy that even with the Nuzlocke, it's barely even a challenge. Players would actually love for a hard mode in Pokemon, with different settings removed, or trainers having extra Pokemon, or better AI, just to feel something again. But if the developers aren't going to create difficulty settings, then the players will do it themselves. And one of the other ways that players have created their own difficulty challenges has been by speedrunning games. To them, the game has become so easy that it's no longer about just playing it, but beating it as fast as possible. Shoot, even games that are super hard like Dark Souls, people still manage to speedrun them. Players will always find a way to play the games that they want to their way. So I think that if games just create as much customization of the game, it's a win-win scenario for everybody. A good example of this is Ultra Kill. Ultra Kill gives players the ability to change specific difficulties of bosses or enemies on top of plenty of other features to change the gameplay completely. I used these features one time when the boss was way too hard and I tried 28 times in a row. It didn't take away from the experience for me. If anything, it enhanced it. A player like me would have given up completely, but this allowed me to continue and enjoy the rest of the game on the regular difficulty and improve. The next time I saw a boss, I beat him. And if you want to watch my full playthrough of Ultra Kill, it's on the second channel. However, this is all for single player campaign driven games. What about when it's player versus player? Game developers who work on PvP games understand the importance of giving the player a challenging competitive match, but also they don't want to make matches so hard that they can't win ever. So skill-based matchmaking, yes, I know that word is scary, has been implemented with varying levels of success to balance the matchmaking experience. Look, there's no perfect way to make multiplayer games not feel difficult for new players, but the game loop should be rewarding enough that even in defeat, the player wants to improve and get better at the game. And eventually, they'll win and maybe even go pro. However, one of the biggest difference between player versus player versus enemy type games is that everybody's game has to be the same for the competitive integrity to work. There are strategies that may be considered noob friendly, but just because they're noob friendly doesn't mean that everybody, even pros, can't use it. So what's my point? I guess I just wanted to showcase how difficulty plays a huge part in the enjoyment of a game. It's like spicy food. Some people love spicy food, some people don't. And while I think it would benefit everyone to have options for the spice level that they want, the chefs sometimes worked really hard on their signature dish. So its spice level is what you get, which does mean some people will never try that dish. But others, even those who aren't that into spicy food, will give it a try, and eventually will get used to the flavor, and maybe even love it. That was a long analogy, but I think you get the point. You paid for your food, so do whatever the hell you want with it. It may be for you, and it may not be. But I think we as gamers just appreciate when the chef cares. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later.